Now I'm going to pass the word to Grace, who is going to speak about the about the individual income taxation for foreigners in China. Thank you.
Thank you, Daria, for sharing the information on Social Security. So in my part, I'm going to give you an overview on upcoming changes on individual income tax for foreigners in China. So as you already know that since 1994, foreigners working in China have been granted with 8 tax-exempt benefits received in a non-cash form or through reimbursement. So among them, like housing allowance, meal allowance, relocation expenses, home leave allowance or allowance for children's education are the most commonly applied by foreigners, especially for housing allowance and children education allowance account the biggest portion for the tax-exempt benefits. But since in 2019, China passed its new individual income tax law, introducing a regime of special additional deductions for resident taxpayers, intending to align the tax policies for Chinese citizens and foreign tax residents. So to leave the foreigners and foreign companies some adjustment time, Chinese government gave a 3-year transition period from 2019 to 2021 to adapt to the change. So from January 1st, 2022, which is like less than 2 months away, foreign tax residents in China will no longer benefit from the tax-exempt allowances for children's education, language training, and housing. Instead, they must apply the special additional deductions the same way as Chinese citizens. So after here, you probably have 2 questions to ask. First, whether the old tax-exempt benefits will be further renewed. So for now, there is no news or regulations about the renewal. And so we still need to monitor what will happen in the next several months. But the general perception is that it's not going to be renewed. And the second question is, since the regulation says that the 3 benefits for children's education, language training, and housing will not be applied, then whether the other 5 tax-exempt benefits will be kept. So again, the regulation is not clear on this, so we still need to see whether there will be news or regulations to clarify this point. But again, the general perception is it's not going to be kept. So the most likely scenario is that the 8 tax-exempt benefits will be completely replaced by 6 special additional deductions. So in the next few slides, I'm going to go over the 6 special additional deductions with the most commonly asked questions. So the first deduction is children's education. So this deduction applies to full-time academic education from primary school, secondary school, all the way to doctoral education. But bear in mind that summer and winter vacation and temporary suspension from school do not impact deduction. And also it applies to overseas academic education. Apart from that, it also applies to preschool education from age of 3 to primary school, and whether the children are enrolled in kindergartens is not a precondition for deduction. The standard for deduction is RMB 1,000 per month per child. It can be either deducted by 100% by one parent or 50% by each parent. So the next deduction is for continuing education. This only applies to domestic continuing education, academic education. The standard is 400 per month, capped at 48 months for the same degree. And whether the taxpayer obtains degree certificate is not a precondition for deduction. And this deduction also applies to technician vocational qualifications and professional technician vocational qualifications. The standard is 3,600 per year, and the qualifications must be listed in a catalog of national vocational qualifications, which includes, for the time being, 139 items. So in that sense, the language training will no longer be deductible item. And it includes such as qualification for legal professions, CPA, or for constructor, or for teachers, etc. And this deduction applies to one continuing academic education and one vocational qualification at the same time. So the next deduction is for housing rental. So this applies to taxpayer who does not own any property in the city where the person works. And in terms of standard applied, the key point is it has to apply the standard where the person actually works. For example, if the taxpayer works in Kunshan but lives in Shanghai, and then the person can still apply the deduction by the standard of the workplace, which is Kunshan in this case. However, if the taxpayer's employer is in Kunshan, but the actual workplace is in Shanghai, for example, the employee works for a branch of the employer, or the employee works on a project basis, which entails the rental of an apartment in Shanghai, then in that case, the person can apply the deduction of the standard of the actual working place, which is Shanghai in this case. So the housing rental shall be deducted by the taxpayer, but only provided the taxpayer bears the rental. So in that case, if the rental is paid directly by the company to the landlord, or eventually the taxpayer reimbursed from company for the rental, which in both cases, in the end, the taxpayer does not really bear the rental, so this deduction cannot be applied to them. The standard for the cities like Shanghai or Beijing, the standard is 1,500 per month, and for cities like Suzhou, Taichung, or Kunshan, the standard is 1,100 per month, and for smaller city, it's 800 per month. And the next one is regarding the interest on mortgage for the first property, because this deduction is not really commonly applied for foreigners. So I list the information here just for your reference, but please bear in mind that the taxpayer and the spouse cannot apply the deduction for housing rental and interest on mortgage at the same time.
Grace, a quick question, if I may. Someone is asking these numbers. Is it Chinese renminbi or is it US dollars? Or maybe you could just clarify.
RMB, Chinese RMB.
Chinese
yeah.
RMB. Thank you.
And the next one is deduction for the medical treatment for serious illness. Again, because this deduction is directly related to the basic medical insurance. So if the foreigners you don't pay the basic, you don't participate in the basic medical insurance, you are not going to apply this deduction. And the last deduction is for support for the elder. This applies applicable to support to parents aged 60 or above, or grandparents aged 60 or above whose children have passed away. So the taxpayer can apply the deduction if one parent or one grandparent aged 60 or above, and this is accessible to foreigners as well. The standard is that where if the taxpayer is a single child, is 2,000 per month. If the taxpayer has siblings, it's 2,000 per month shared among the siblings, but up to 1,000 per month per person. So in order to let you know the impact of the change, I here give you a very simple case study. So let's imagine that Antonio is a tax resident in China employed by a foreign domestic company in Suzhou. He earns an annual salary of RMB 60,000 pre-tax, but disregarding Social Security. He has 2 children, one in primary school, the other one age 4 years old. As remunerations in kind, his company leases an apartment for him in Shanghai with a annual rental of RMB 300,000. And also he gets reimbursed from his company for his child's education of RMB 200,000 per year. He is a single child in family, and his father aged 65 years old, and assuming Antonio bears his own IIT. So I think you can see in the calculation in 2021, only his basic salary of RMB 600,000 is really the taxable income. So as a result, tax rate is 30%, and the tax amount is about 110,000. But from 2022, all his housing allowance, children's education will be added to the basic salary, which becomes a very large salary income amount. And even though he can claim the children's education deduction, which is 24,000, and the support for the elderly deduction is also 24,000, but eventually the tax rate increased to 45%, and the tax amount is RMB over RMB 264,000. So which is a very large increase, it's 142% increase. And I didn't put any rental deduction here. It's because his house is rented by the company directly, which means he cannot really claim the deduction for the rental. And as you can imagine, that if this increase of tax burden is completely borne by Antonio himself, it's going to severely impact his life in China. But I know that some company they bear the individual income tax for their employees before, and so when the change comes, they would also like to bear this change of tax burden for them. But please bear in mind that if the companies do that, they need to first gross up the income and then calculate the tax burden. And the next upcoming change is the cancellation of the preferential policy on annual bonus. So from January 1st, 2022, all resident taxpayers' annual bonus must be consolidated into their comprehensive income to calculate individual income tax. Well, this is a big disappointment for everyone, not just the foreigners, also for Chinese citizens. And also, I give you a quick case study on the tax impact. So Antonio is also tax resident in China, but he earns an annual salary of RMB 800,000 and also receives a fixed amount of annual bonus, RMB 300,000, assuming he does not qualify for any other special additional deductions. So as you can see in 2021, his basic salary and annual bonus can be calculated with IIT separately. So the tax rate is lower, and the total tax amount is 231,000. But from 2022, the basic salary and annual bonus will need to be added together, which will increase the tax rate to 45%. So at the end, the tax amount will become 286,000. So it's a 23% tax burden increase. So you may ask whether there are any preferential policies acceptable for foreigners left in China. There are. I only list a couple of examples here. The first one is for foreigners working in the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area, who are qualified as top or urgently needed talents. They will get a subsidy based on the difference in IT burden between the mainland China and Hong Kong, and this subsidy is tax exempt in China, which will result in an effective tax rate of 15%. And also in the Hainan Free Report from 2020 to 2024, for the top level and all urgently needed talents working in there, the IT burden over 15% for comprehensive income and operational income will be tax exempt. And then from 2024 to 2035, for individuals staying in the Hainan Free Report for over 183 days in the tax year, the comprehensive income and operational income arising from the free report will be applied with a 3-tier progressive rate up to 15%. And then in Shanghai, from August 2019, Shanghai Lingang New Area grants IT subsidy for foreigners based on difference in actual tax burden in China and that in the whole country, with 100% refund rate for senior management and 80% for the mid-level employees. But please bear in mind that for Lingang New Area, the policy, because it's a local policy, the other two is national level policy. So for this local policy, the subsidy obtained by the foreigners will still need to be taxed. So in which sense that it will diminish the effect of this tax reduction by this. So some takeaways from this section is that Although it is most likely the preferential policies on tax-exempt benefits and annual bonus will not be renewed, but we still need to monitor what will happen in the next few months in case there is any last-minute changes. And also for companies and taxpayers shall try to utilize existing accessible benefits to reduce the overall tax burden. And for those companies that has like secondment regime, they also need to take into account the increased tax burden when they consider how many percent they want to second to China and the overall labor cost for that. So this is the end of my section. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, both Daria and Grace. I think now we will move into the Q&A, and I think let's just maybe we can have.
Who's going to stand?
You want to stand?
Yeah, because
Let's
if
do
we
it
see
standing.
they will only see
Okay,
our-
but we can take the camera down.
Oh, okay.
Let's do it standing. At least I will take a seat because I'll get the questions. But maybe we can start by asking if there's any questions in the room first. I think there was one here.
You can just go ahead, yeah.
It's just a request. May we get these slides?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the slides, we can share the slides with all the participants after today, both online and offline as well.
Thank you. You're very helpful.
I think there was another question. Yeah.
Actually, I have two questions. One is that for Daria, you have mentioned that foreigners in China is divided into two categories. One is local hire, another is how to say despite the exposure. The second with the second agreement in China. So for the second category of the expatriates, dispatched to China, is the social insurance voluntary or mandatory?
Mandatory, because actually the second category of dispatch workers is more from the foreign companies' perspective. Will the labor relationship in China would be identical in both cases? Whether it's a local employment only or it's just dispatched employment, from the creation of labor agreement and creation of immigration documents, it could work exactly the same way.
Okay, this mandatory regulation effective from when? Starting from when?
From 2011.
But for Shanghai, for practice, the government is not controlling.
Shanghai is like 25 of August 2021.
So, okay, what I mean is that for local governments, even though it says it's mandatory, still, how to say, the monitoring is not that strict. You can pay, but cannot pay. This is from the local.
Okay, yes. I have reached out to a number of companies registered in Shanghai in different districts, not only Huangpu, but also I dealt with more far away suburban, let's say, districts. And some of them have reached out to the social insurance in the labor bureau, and they said that it's not mandatory. We don't need it. You don't have to contribute. But if someone new will come in because they don't provide you with a black and white paper saying we waive the risk for your company in the future, that if someone comes in 5 years and ask you to pay not only the outstanding amounts you didn't pay, but also penalties, and you don't know whether they will apply late payment or the other one, right? So like all of the things, it's on your own risk. You decide how much you want to risk.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
Well, it is mandatory according to the law. It applies to local hire or dispatchment, whatever. But because it's, as you mentioned, that the enforcement of the law is not very good on that. So as we called several labor bureaus, they only recognize the payment. They think it's only the local hire is a local contract that can make the social security. If you don't have a local contract, it's not possible for them to recognize it and to make to take the participation for the social security. But normally, even like if you are on a secondment regime and you are dispatched to China, sometimes it's also recommended to have a local contract because otherwise they have other issues, not
You,
just the
you can't apply
labor.
for work permit if you don't have local contract. Yeah.
Well, so they have other issues to consider. So it's not just about social security.
Yeah, and of course, we are speaking about these things during pandemic, because of course, before you could come seconded on business visa, but now we are not even taking into consideration this scenario because it's just not feasible to be implemented.
And also that if employee they think they want the social security and you didn't pay for them, they can file a complaint to the labor bureau for that, and also they can file a lawsuit or take you to the labor arbitration. And in all these cases, the authority or the tribunal, arbitration tribunal or the court will probably rule in favor of the employee and ask you to make up the social securities.
Because the employer
All
is the withholding
compensation.
agent, so the employer is the one who has to pay this amounts. And also some of the companies share that, for example, they call their labor bureau in their district of incorporation, and the labor and the social security bureau requested them to start the payments from their last contract, and last contract should be last visa renewal. Should be intended as last visa renewal.
So yes, so you mean for foreign employee, we could contract here, for instance, renew the visa, the working permit in December or January. So if voluntarily they have agreement with the foreign company or is here to start to pay the social contribution, they will it will start from the previous contract or the first contract.
For the latest contract. So when you do the visa renewal, in theory, you every time you do visa renewal, you sign a labor contract.
Yes.
So from the latest labor contract. So if your latest visa renewal was last year in December, then that would be last year December. If you renewed your visa this year in August, it will be from August this year.
Okay, so they don't take in consideration that the 10 years.
No. They take in consideration from latest. So the general practice now is from the latest agreement. But again, you have to reach out to your official in charge of the Human Resources and Social Security Bureau and check with them what they advise you to do and how they advise you to implement it.
Yes.
And also make your decision accordingly.
Yeah, so the fact there is an agreement with the employer, do you think they want to, before implementation of this law of enforcement, then the employees that are employer go to the bureau and say, okay, we agree that if we start now, when we renew this contract to the visa to this employee, do you think the bureau, so this is case by case, I don't know.
Case by case, we have to reach out to them. No, you call them and you ask, like, I mean, like, it depends on your company's record and where are you located. It's like many things. I cannot advise you now without knowing your company's background, but yeah, you have to relate with them. It was one part of the suggested items actually on my last slide. That, you monitor the situation. Yeah.
You have another question?
Yes, I have another question. Just now, we showed that Denmark is exempt of pension. That means if for the displaced employee, if they are paying in Denmark, the pension, they don't need to be in China.
Yes.
And how about the medical and unemployment insurance card?
The rest are those that are mandatory to be paid here. Actually, the pension is one of the highest.
It will be refunded if a foreigner leaves China.
Yes, so if you leave China, you have two options. Option number one, you leave China, but you think you might come back. So you leave your social insurance account here and you leave the money on it here. So you cannot take your money back as soon as the account is open. But if you think that you're leaving for good, you terminate your contract, you terminate your account, you close the account, and then your money is paid to you in a lump sum by
Are there
the,
any restrictions on that? Like when an employee decides to go back to his home country, and he said, I want to withdraw my share of the contribution. And are there any restrictions?
no restriction, it's just a bureaucratic process, paperwork to go through. But then they,
Right, yeah, you also just get lump sum, right?
yeah, you get it paid in lump sum. So maybe to plan in advance, go to ask them, because then there is a lot of variety also on how, like, the pack of documents they ask and supporting documents. So like the best way, if you're planning to leave, maybe a few months in advance, you go to the labor bureau and tell them about your intention to terminate and to close your account, and ask them what is requested, how much time, because for sure they will make the payment to a local bank. And if you are not here, maybe you close also your bank accounts, then you have to authorize a third party, and then it's going to be a nightmare, yeah.
One more question about individual income tax. You mentioned that there is special policy in finance free trade zone and in that. I also heard about our zones, but if you register a company there, or I don't know, branch, and then you put employees there, but physically they work in Shanghai, and basically, okay, they maybe travel sometimes to Hainan. But if there are any restrictions for that?
Well, it depends on which policy you are talking about, like for the Greater Bay Area.
Optimization of
Yeah, I know.
individual
I mean,
income tax.
like for each policy, because for the Greater Bay Area,
Okay.
you have to first qualify as the top talents there, and also you have to pay the income tax there,
It doesn't
Yeah,
matter where to pay.
and
No, but she's saying that whether they're going to track you in that place, that they are spending enough time, or whether there are any risks for having employees registered
yeah,
and maybe on a visa there, even if they set up a branch, but they are still employee of like whatever Hainan, right? But they are working out of Shanghai office, like what?
it depends on, like for the Greater Bay Area, if you are qualified as you meet the qualifications there, and then you pay the IIT there, even though you travel around, probably you can get the policy there. But for the Hainan Free Trade Port, it depends on, because for now I didn't mention, but from after 2024, because it has the condition that you must be there for over 183 days
In
in Hainan Free Trade Port.
and what about Lingang?
Lingang,
It's local?
because it's a local policy, and
Lingan is Shanghai, right?
yeah, it's very local policy. You have to talk with the official there to see whether they want to grant you the subsidy, but it's not that strict. As
for
far as
tax.
I mean,
heard.
because it's also true, because where you get permits, theoretically, you have to work there. If there are any legal implication, if you get a Lingang work permit granted by the Lingang government, and then you're working with Jadui, and then the labor bureau comes and say, okay, you work and pay taxes in Lingang and to local government, and you don't get anything, then go to work to Lingang. That's my
Well, if you
question.
pay the IIT to Lingang
Yes.
district authority, and if you register a company there, even though it's virtual, not that you don't have that many people there, and you pay the tax there. I think you have to talk with them, but I think they may grant you a subsidy.
But the issue is here is that if you don't plan to have your operations in the place where you enjoy from the preferential tax policies, what kind of impact you can have if you have, for example, your office, your registered address in Lingan, but then your office is in Xintiandi, and all of, like, I don't know, 50 employees are sitting in Xintiandi.
Well, it's for Lingang, as far as I know, they are not that strict.
But it's not
with the
Lingan.
operation.
I think it's
Xintiandi,
Xintiandi. If they find out, what are the risks?
But you don't really, because legally speaking, you cannot have 100 people working in Xintiandi without a registration with authority. Because in theory, even you have a branch, you have anything, we should have a registration. In that case, you probably
Registration.
need to have a registration for the branch of the company in Xintiandi.
But then they cannot enjoy the policy, so they have to be in Lingan, right?
Well, if you have a virtual office in Lingang, they can still grant you the policy.
So you can register your branch office in Lingan, or your main company in Lingan, employ your employees there, and then in a
Have a
way,
minimum operation over there.
so like you still have to put some substance there.
What depends on
Because virtual office you mentioned before is not anything about
It's
substance,
not-
right?
My question is not about substance, it's not a problem. The question is about like, even not about tax authorities, but I'm sure they will be okay with that. But my question about the labor bureau or Chujudin, the visa granting bureau, because when you apply for the visa, you have to write working address for the employee. And of course, you will write to get a tax policy. You probably write Lingan to get 15% flat, but then you put your employee in CNT, and if Chujudin arrives, then they if they may have some legally questions that foreigner must seek, he has to see. That's the point from legal point of view. And then they cancel his visa or go to Sydney night. That's the point.
I cannot really estimate the risk over there. I know that you cannot really have your work permit saying you work in Shanghai, but you actually work in Taichung. This is a big risk for you. But if you have your work permit saying you are in Lingang, but you work in Xinjiang, I don't know how much risk there is.
Because it's the same Muslim municipality,
Yeah.
just different districts.
And because they are not going to really all the time checking where you are actually working.
But from
Yes,
the,
I mean, I need legal, some reference to the law. Maybe. It's okay.
Okay, I think we will jump over to some of the questions submitted online as well. There's been a couple of questions submitted about what we are talking about right now. Actually, there's a lot of rumors about maybe there will be some special tax incentives in Shanghai. Maybe this flat rate of 15%. Some people are asking online if this is confirmed now, or is it still rumors, or what to make of it at this point.
yeah, actually, this is part of our discussion just now,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
15%.
Yeah.
So they are already available in Lingan, right? This is
There's
part of,
a subsidy. It's not really a uniform tax rate in Lingang. It's only a subsidy to the senior management and mid-level employee. But for Greater Bay Area, the effective tax rate is 15, and also for the Hainan Free Trade Port is more like 15 too. But for Shanghai, we haven't heard any news about a uniform flat rate Shanghai.
So for some districts in Shanghai, it's actually not a rumor at this point with the flat rate of 15. But when Shanghai, in general, it's not applicable for all of Shanghai.
I don't know where
Shanghai, no, it's Lingan. So Lingan is trying to retain its senior management from escaping into GBA and Hainan by issuing, they were the last ones to issue this policy, yes.
Those were a couple of the questions because it was a kind of an extension of what was discussed here already. The next question, I think, is mostly to you, Grace. It's about the special additional deductions that you were talking about, domestic, continuing academic education, and so on. The question goes, who is liable to report these allowances? Is it the employee or the employer?
Well, the foreigners, they can make their own declarations online during the annual tax deduction, from March to June. They can do this on the app, or they can ask their employer to do this on their behalf. And but if they entrust the employer, I believe they need to ask the employer probably before the end of June or something, so that they can, get prepared and how to use that.
Can I say also a word about this? So basically, this part is part of the general practice, and usually the employees expect the employers to assist them, especially when when this rule was just implemented a few years ago. Actually, they because this is the system also same for Chinese employees, so they were expecting the employer to provide them guidance, and also because it is very important to submit all supporting documents for the claim. in the right format and on time. Otherwise, you don't get the claim and you cannot carry forward it to the next month. So, for example, we have developed tools to help companies to do this and to assist their employees to make claim.
And I think for the employer, if they help their employees, they should obtain the documents relating to the deductions.
We have an APP where the employee uploads the documents before the submission deadline. We revise the documents, we give them feedback, and we, let's say, complete the task.
If you do it by yourself, it's just you don't need to just keep yourself the documents, and the app only requires you to fill in like.
But you have to make it sure that you
basic
that the documents are in the right format.
I think we have a few extra questions on from submitted online, so I think we would like to ask them first, and then of course, because we have a longer networking session here as well for those who are able to join that, so maybe we'll just go through them. The next question here is for the housing rental deduction. Do people still need to provide the I think the tax-free 发票, right, issued by the local neighborhood, the town, or the DEDUCTION government, or are there other facilitations?
It's no longer tax exempt, so yeah,
From the next year.
until next year, yeah.
Okay, so I suppose you cannot even submit the.
So nowadays, yes, you can submit a FAPIA, which is issued by whoever. As soon as it's accepted by the tax bureau in charge of, then it's fine. But from next year, it's not accepted as it, because it's part. No, you can still submit it, but then it's still the part of your taxable income.
Yes, and also like because from next year it's no longer going to be tax exempt, and of course, like if the rental is paid by the company, they probably should get the invoice for their own, to record their own expenses. But there is a risk here because normally the rental is because for companies, in order to make their own tax deduction for corporate income tax, the expenses should directly related to the generation of their own income. So from next, because before the rental is tax exempt, so authorities do not really care if you make a deduction for these expenses, but from next year, it's taxable income for the employees. And if a company continue to pay the rental for certain employees, like foreigners, and these kind of expenses, if they introduce as their own expense, it could have a problem with the authority for their own deduction as a company. Because it's not directly, it may not consider as directly related to the generation of the company's income.
Someone is asking, what if the person, the individual, pays the rent alone? What supporting documents would they need to provide for housing rental?
What the contract, the invoice? For me, I don't even support. I don't need the invoice.
Okay, there is one extra question actually while we are at the housing rental deduction. So the question reads, will the tax percentage be lowered? This person has made some rough calculations and the cost for having FAPIA on the rent is pretty much the same as the deduction this person would get on the IIT based on the current rate.
So what is the question again?
Will the tax percentage be lowered?
Maybe the question here is whether there would be any extension to the current rule. No. I don't know.
All right. Well, if the person submitted this question could perhaps clarify, else we will move on to the next one. This one is one of the examples that you showed, Grace. You mentioned an example of a made-up employee who now pays this and will, after the changes, pay something else.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that either, I think this was for, you said if the company bears the tax. The question is, if you could repeat that part, if the company can bear the tax.
Well, yes, like for some foreign employees, the company bears the income tax for their salary. And for example, they negotiate the net salary contract. So the employee will receive certain amount of salary and the tax will be borne by the employer. And so when this changes and which increase the tax burden, some employer may also agree to bear the additional tax burden because of this change. So in that case, when you calculate when the company calculates the income tax, they should consider the salary, the rental, or whatever the education, their own net income. So they need to gross up them into a gross income considering the tax, and then based on that, based on the gross income, to calculate the income tax, not just directly apply a tax rate to the net income, because that does not include the income tax.
Thank you, Grace. Then there is one last question submitted online. That question reads, if it's the company or the individual that needs to calculate the total expense of the employee, including salary, housing, and kids' tuition fee monthly, and then deduct the IIT, if it's the individual or the company?
Companies
The company is the withholding agent for individual income tax in
and
China.
social security. So it's completely on the burden of the employer. Employee cannot even access the system. It's like it's written in the laws and the rules that the employer has the responsibility for payment, for calculation and payment of the individual income tax, social insurance, and the salary, of course.
Yeah, and that of course, because we have this, because employers withholding obligation was throughout the year for prepayment of the income tax. But during March to June, the taxpayer himself or herself has the self-declaration obligation. So if there is anything left to report, or if there is any deduction hasn't really been made, they should do this during this time period.
Thank you. Then I think we have time for one last question online before we will close it for the online participants. That question reads, and I think it's a clarification of what we were talking about before. When you issue your fapiao, you pay taxes, even if it's on rent. I think it's 3%, basically on the annual rent of, let's say, 100,000 RMB. This person pays 2.8 thousand RMB of fapiao, but the IIT deducted is a lot. Then the question comes, with the new policy, the allowance is going to be reduced to 1,500 only. I think that was the clarification of the question before. So let me see, the question read, will the tax percentage be lowered? Yeah. Well,
I didn't get it, sorry.
fair enough. I think we have to also wrap up for the online part. So let me just say one last thing to everyone watching online. Let me get back up here in the view. So we have up on the screen now, we have the feedback QR code. So as I mentioned in the beginning, it would be very helpful for us in the EU SME Centre if you could take 1 or 2 minutes, scan it, let us know your feedback, good or bad. Hopefully we can improve in the future. And then we also just want to thank all of you for tuning in today for this workshop on the IIT and Social Security regulation changes. Yeah, and keep an eye out for the EU SME Centre on LinkedIn and on all the other platforms that you can find us on, the website, WeChat, and so on and so forth. So thank you everyone for today, and see you for next EU SME Centre workshop. Thank you.